Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about this video, maximum matrix sum. You are given an n into an integer matrix and you can do the following operation any number of times to find this maximum matrix sum. The first thing that you can do is you can choose any two adjacent elements of a matrix and multiply each chosen element by -1, and the two elements are considered adjacent if and only if they share a border, so you should not consider diagonal elements. Your goal is to maximize the summation of the matrix element and return the maximum sum of the matrix element using the operation mentioned above. Let's take a look over here. You need to make sure that you're able to choose a adjacent sum. So over here we got an element over here. This element can be the top element, can be an adjacent value, or your left element, or your right element, or your bottom element. Any of these can be an adjacent value. Now let's take over the first example over here, 1 minus 1 minus 1 and 1. Over here, if you notice that you need to choose any two adjacency elements and multiply each one of them with -1. So over here, we got this as -1 and this element as -1. And you cannot choose diagonal elements, so there's no way you can choose them. You can either choose these two elements and multiply it by -1, or you can choose these two elements and multiply it by -1. So in this case, I'm choosing this one over here. So when I choose -1 and 1, when I multiply it by -1, over here you can see you get 1 and then you get -1. Now over here we got two elements at the bottom to be -1 and -1, so we decided to multiply it by -1 to get 1, 1, 1, 1, which significantly making the sum of the matrix as 4. Let's take another example over here. When I say share border, you need to remember that they do not mean that you can choose your diagonal elements. You need to make sure that you can choose your top, you can choose the left, right, or the bottom. Now over here, we got 1, 2, 3, -1, -2, -3, and 1, 2, 3. In this case, I'm going to be choosing first this -2 and -3 to be multiplied with -1. When I choose them, they become 2 and they become 3. When I want to choose another number that is -1 to be transformed, for example, let's say that we decide to go with this one. When we decide to go with -1 and -2, when we multiply it, we get, I'm so sorry, when we decide to go with this one, -1 and +2, and when we multiply it by -1, we actually get 1 and -2. Now let's take another choice over here, -1 and 1. When we decide to go with -1 and 1, and when we multiply, we get +1 and -1. Over here, the better choice I would say is definitely going with this one, or leaving this one to be a -1. -2 reduces the sum so less, making it not the maximum. And then over here, -2 and -1 makes a big difference on your maximum sum. So over here, there are two cases if you probably noticed. The first case is having an even number of negative numbers, and then odd numbers of negative numbers. Over here, we got 3 negative numbers, and over here, we got only 2. The one thing that I have noticed over here is when the count of the negative numbers is even, you can significantly reduce the numbers of negative numbers to 0. Over here you can see we had at initial starting we had 2 negative ones, and at the end we had 0 number of negative numbers. And this is possible for all of your numbers. It doesn't matter wherever your negative numbers is placed, it is what it is. So basically, even if you have n number of negative numbers, and if it is even, the maximum sum would be turning all of them to a positive number and eventually adding up to get this number. Now, if the count of the negative numbers is odd, there will be at least one number that will remain at the end to be a negative value. Now, there are two things that you need to know, making this sum a very, very simple one. If the number is even, then you can just simply turn all of your numbers to a positive number, all of your negative numbers to a positive number, and simply add them up to get the maximum sum. Now, if it is odd, then you need to transform, pick the least number and give that a negative symbol, and then adding up to get the maximum sum. Let's say we got an example over here, -1, -2, and -3. The simple thing that we do over here is have this least number 1 to be a negative, and then we convert these positive, and then we add them up to get the maximum sum. So over here we have 4 as the maximum sum. If this is the case, we convert these two, we take these two numbers and you can simply multiply it by -1 and convert this one to be a negative and simply make this positive, and then you can go ahead and find out the maximum sum again. Now in this solution, we don't actually include multiplying -1 to the adjacency. We do only two things. The first thing is that we make all the numbers to be positive, and then the count of the negative numbers is even. We just return the sum of all of the numbers. But when the count of the negative numbers is odd, we just assign the negative sign to the least amount of value, and then we sum all of the other values. The first variable that we're going to initialize is count, which will count the number of negative values. Next, we need a min value to store the minimum value when a negative numbers, the count of the negative numbers is odd. We need to find the minimum value so that we can assign the negative sign to that value. Here, we're going to take the sum value to be 0. This will help us to add each of the values in the matrix. We are going to traverse through each values in the matrix. If each of the value in the matrix is less than 0, we're going to find the absolute value of that matrix because it's a negative value, right? If it's a negative value, I'm going to first increase the count. Another thing that you can do over here is, if it is a negative value, you can increase the count. And after this, you can find the absolute value. So I'm going to have int val is equal to, I'm going to have math.abs to find the maximum absolute value. So even if it's a negative or it's not, it doesn't matter. We just convert that value to its absolute value. And once you convert that value, you're going to add that to the sum. So we're going to go ahead and add that value to the sum. And now once you add that value to the sum, now we're going to find the minimum value among it. It does not matter whether you have the count to be negative or positive, it doesn't matter, we just find the minimum value. Make sure whenever you're trying to find out the minimum value, you need to make sure that the minimum value is the minimum value or the value that you made it to be absolute value. You have to take the absolute value whenever you're trying to calculate the minimum value. Now, after this for loop, we can simply go and check if the count is even. Now, whenever it's even, you can return the sum. Now, if it is not even, you need to make sure that your sum true into the minimum value. Now, let me explain why do we do true into the minimum value. There is one mistake I've done over here. Instead of the min value, we need to put the maximum value, because you're going to find the minimum value and the min should have a maximum value so that you can find a minimum value. Over here, let's have a look on why do we do this. So over here we got 3 negative values, so it is an odd number of negative values. So when I first tried to do like this, let's say I add them all up and we get 6, and then we do -1, it just gives 5. So whenever I try to do -1, I just add these two numbers, ignoring this number completely. But whenever you're trying to find the sum of all of these numbers, we do need to include this number, and we do need to exclude it one time. So the reason we're excluding it for one time, so that we can get the correct value of these two numbers, and another time we try to include it is because we need to add this number with these numbers as well. So you need to add all of the elements in the matrix. So that's why we do them 2 times. So to make the process simpler, we just multiply it by 2 and then minus that value with the total sum.